Mumonkan, case number 42. The girl comes out of Samadhi. This koan contains a rather complicated story with 4 personalities representing 4 possible states of mind, and we will go into that later. Because before we are starting the koan text, let me first clarify a bit about the word Samadhi. Samadhi is one of these things that happen when one sits a lot in meditation. For example, I was doing a 7-day session at Daibosatsu Zendo in New York State, and it was one of those things that happened quite a lot over there. We would be sitting long sits of 50 minutes, then there would be a walk of 10 minutes, then sit again, and then walk again, and that would go on the whole day, except there are, of course, a few other activities as well, like we would eat and we would clean the monastery and do things like that. But when you sit that much, then there is something that can happen to several of the participants. They would suddenly be taken into what we call Samadhi state. So usually what this then means is the dualistic boundaries which are usually surrounding us, they just drop suddenly. And one also then experiences a feeling of joy when this happens. And then even when thoughts would arise, these would be illuminating thoughts about enlightenment, and we can keenly understand Buddha's words or words of wisdom at those times. You can try to emulate this yourself, you the viewer, and you can just sit for a while and feel like if you will be sitting on a rock surrounded by water, and this happens in a lake and there is quite a lot of wind. The wind represents here all the movements caused by society, caused by your usual activities, etc. But then when you sit a little longer, the wind tends to quieten down. However, when you look from your rock into the water like this, you slowly see the waves also quietening down, but this takes quite a long time still. Even though the wind or the external factors have died down, the waves would continue. And when you would look down, you would still see troubled water under your rock. Then time goes by. The session or the meditation sessions go by. Slowly but surely, the water also becomes still. And when you then look down into the water, you see your own reflection. And when that happens, the state of Samadhi can occur to you. You suddenly feel transposed in some kind of blissful state. You can practice that, but I would like to give you a word of caution. Usually, when you see people in Samadhi and the bell rings and people would get up, that kind of blissful state would suddenly vanish. So in other words, it would be a state with a beginning and an end. It's a little bit like having a dream at night. There is a beginning and an end. And when it ends, you find yourself more or less just like you were in the beginning. That is very different of what is called the natural state. The natural state is our living background, the one experiences any state that comes and goes. The one, for example, who lives the waking state. The one, for example, who lived the sleeping state. The one who experiences sights, sounds, smells, tastes. The one who experiences all bodily sensations, even the breath. That one who experiences all these things never come and goes. So in other words, the one who experiences Samadhi is also the natural state. But if you are stuck in a Samadhi, that means you still need to do an extra step to shift your attention from that state to that which is the ever-present witness. Now that we elaborated a bit about these terms, including Samadhi and natural state, let us now read the koan text of today. And as I already said, it is a bit long and complicated. Once in the old days, in the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, Manjushri went to the assembly of the Buddhas and found that everyone had departed to his original dwelling place, except for Shakyamuni Buddha himself and a girl who remained seated in Samadhi, close to the Shakyamuni Buddha's throne. So let me stop here for a second already. Just for background information, in Mahayana Buddhism, there have been 6 previous Buddhas. And the Shakyamuni Buddha is the last one and is the historical one that lived 500 before Christ, more or less. And by the way, in Theravada Buddhism, there were even many more Buddhas. So it depends a little bit on which stream of Buddhism you are into. Also, we have encountered now this person called Manjushri. So just a word about him. Manjushri is considered as the teacher of all Buddhas. And Manjushri forsake becoming a Buddha himself in order to be able to get reincarnated as the teacher of all these respective Buddhas whenever they would arise in the world. So now that I introduced these 2 personalities, we go back to our story. Manjushri, as I mentioned, entered a hall and saw Shakyamuni Buddha and a girl next to him sitting in perfect Samadhi. Manjushri then asked Shakyamuni Buddha, "Why can this girl get near the Buddha's throne and I cannot?" Shakyamuni Buddha said, "Well, bring her out of her Samadhi and ask her yourself." Manjushri walked around the girl 3 times, snapped his fingers, took her up to Brahma heaven, and exerted all his miraculous powers to try to bring her out of her meditation, out of her Samadhi, but in vain. The Buddha said, "Even 100,000 Manjushris cannot make her wake up. But down below, past 1200 million lands as innumerable as the sands of the Ganges River, there is a bodhisattva Momyo. He will be able to arouse this girl from her samadhi. Instantly, Momyo emerged from the earth and made a bow to the Buddha, who gave him his order. Momyo went over to the girl and snapped his fingers once. At this, the girl came out of samadhi. So, it appears that this girl also seems somehow to have become hooked to a samadhi state. As I already mentioned before the text, samadhi is only a state with a beginning and an end. And there is a danger for those spiritual seekers who fall into these kind of samadhis. They are getting attached to them. They're going to be hooked to samadhi. And they will try to repeat this experience again and again as something they would like to repeat. It's like getting a high. It's better than drugs because it's not chemical, but still it's kind of an attachment. It's something we try to regenerate artificially. Moreover, samadhi often leads to arrogance once we get out of that. Indeed, I often notice that people who got into samadhi, they get kind of cranky and angry when they finally get out of samadhi. They easily get disturbed by others. Even when they hear some small talk in the corridor, they can get irritated. It's a bit then like a baby being disturbed from his sleep. The baby then starts crying because the baby feels it lost its oneness, its harmony. They would have liked to be that girl, all these people, and stay forever in samadhi. But you cannot stay forever in such a state. There's also that famous story from the Hindu tradition about a master and a disciple. They walked many, many miles and eventually settled somewhere near a village in a small cave. And the master was thirsty, so he would tell his disciple, "Can you fetch me some water? I'm thirsty." So the disciple went to the village and returned with a little bit of water. But in the meantime, the master fell into a samadhi state and was sitting there in perfect bliss. So what did the disciple do? He sat next to the master, waiting for him to come out. But somehow, an hour passed, a day passed, a week passed, etc., etc. More and more time. So the disciple started to see there is really something very special here coming out. He went to the village talking to people. My master in this cave, he went into a samadhi state and he just stays in that blissful state. It's very special. So the villagers came and they were sitting there in that cave looking at this phenomenon of this man sitting in perfect bliss and sitting there day after day. And indeed, weeks went by, months went by, years went by. In the end, the disciple and the master, they were growing long beards already, and this kept going on and on and on. Finally, the master started to stir, as if it was going to come out of his samadhi. So suddenly the disciple went back to the village and said, "Oh, now, after all these years, you have to come, because he's finally getting out of his samadhi. You have to come and listen. Maybe the first few words he will speak will be very special. They will be special words of wisdom." And the cave got filled with people from the village, watching for this moment to arrive that this sage finally gets out of samadhi. And indeed, it happened. He started stirring more and more, looking at his disciple, and the first thing he said was, "Where's the water? I'm still thirsty." So, in other words, after all these years, it's as if nothing at all had happened. He was thirsty when asking his disciple to go to the village, and it's as if nothing had happened during all these years. When he woke up, he would still ask, "Where's the water?" as if no time had elapsed at all. What's the purpose of that? Why would anyone be in such a samadhi state if it doesn't bring you anything? Life somehow in samadhi becomes a little bit like living like a yo-yo, I call it, that kind of game with this toy going up and down. You go up, you're in samadhi, you go down, you're out of samadhi. And that kind of life of yo-yo playing can go on and will not really bring you to what is ultimately desirable, that is the natural state. Anyway, after this story, let us now go back to our koan text. And as you may remember, there were 4 figures described in there, and I will briefly describe which of the state of minds these 4 figures belong to. Let us start with the last one, Momyo. That guy who was coming from the deep earth and suddenly appeared, and who was able to wake up the girl, he represents our ordinary dualistic mind. He just needs to snap once and the girl samadhi is broken. Second personality is Manjushri. That is the teacher of all the Buddhas. And he represents a state in which one is constantly in samadhi. The third personality is the girl herself, and she would represent a state where we play yo-yo. We go in samadhi, we go out of samadhi. And the fourth personality is Shakyamuni Buddha. He represents a being that is simultaneously in samadhi and not in samadhi. So it's combining the 2 states. And to make a comparison, I will give you the metaphor of the ocean and the wave. In general, we are taking ourselves as this dualistic body-mind, separate from all others. That is a bit like living like a wave. We believe we are separate. That is the state of Momyo. Then we can also take ourselves as being awareness, as being consciousness, and that is a bit like being water rather than the wave. That is then represented here as this Manjushri. When you're constantly in this water state, you cannot really function very well in the world, as we have seen. However, we already know the girl acting like a yo-yo goes in and out, meaning one time she plays the wave, that is when she gets out of her samadhi, and another time she can play water, being water rather than wave. And the Buddha is a being that experiences life both simultaneously. He is aware being water, and yet he is also simultaneously waves and can act in life in a very natural way. And that then is what we usually call being in the natural state. It is clear that the ultimate goal, if there is such thing as a goal, that we can have in our lifetime is to become like the Buddha, meaning simultaneously being waves and water. For example, you see nature during your walk in the forest, you see the leaves, the birds, you see everything surrounding you, and simultaneously you do not lose your aware space in which it all happens. Another example, you are in the supermarket and you are addressing the cashier, but in the same time you simultaneously do not lose consciousness which you are, this open awareness which you are, and then this communication with this person, it happens seamlessly. Or you talk to a friend, but simultaneously you no longer lose the sense of being water, of being consciousness, while also talking to your friend. These three examples gives you an idea on what is meant by being simultaneously water and waves. One can live that way, and the result is often going to be that one has a feeling of happiness, very often coming up in all such circumstances. The koan text of today was actually a reminder for spiritual seekers who may be stuck with samadhi states. And the text tells us not to get hooked to such states and to go beyond it to our natural state. So for you, viewers at home, if you wish, you can practice what we did in the beginning of this session. You can practice being sitting on a rock and looking at the water and the wind dying down, and after that having the waves dying down, and that is a wonderful meditation exercise. However, also practice the same thing while walking in nature, while addressing the cashier in a supermarket, or when talking to a good friend. I wish to thank you for your attention. Have a nice day.